The True Story of the Strangers. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button and drop a comment. The Strangers' true story is rooted in real-life crimes, including the Manson family murders and the unsolved Keddie Cabin murders. The film's realistic scenario of a home invasion adds to its terrifying nature, as it could happen to anyone, making it more unsettling than supernatural horror. The success of The Strangers has led to a planned trilogy, with the first installment focusing on a couple being targeted by masked killers at an Airbnb, possibly drawing inspiration from real-life incidents. The 2008 home invasion horror film The Strangers' True Story adds to the terror of the movie. While the horror genre is often, and not unfairly, associated with tales of monsters, ghosts, and other supernatural creatures, some of the most effective horror films of all time rely on none of those things. As playful as these nightmarish visions are, most exist in the realm of fantasy, allowing audiences to view them in relative comfort. 2008 horror movie The Strangers cleverly subverts this premise, becoming scary precisely because it could happen to anyone watching the film. Here is The Strangers' true story explained. Indeed, while critical consensus remains split on The Strangers' plot, the efficacy of the film's horror elements is unquestioned as a sadistic portrait of a home invasion. While The Strangers' insular premise introduces very few characters outside of Kristen, Liv Tyler, James, Scott Speedman, and the three strangers, and this microcosmic nature allows an almost unparalleled ratcheting of tension as a young couple fights tooth and nail for their lives. Despite the almost ethereal nature of its masked antagonists, The Strangers' true story is based on a few. Several harrowing real-life crimes form the backbone of The Strangers' core narrative, including several notorious murders. Here are the real-life crimes and true stories that inspired The Strangers.
In 2008, a horror film was created called The Strangers, and 10 years later in 2018, The Strangers Prey at Night was released. The Strangers stood out to many people, including myself, as all of the sudden horror movies came closer to blurring the lines of fiction and non-fiction. Yes, these killers wore creepy masks, but that was it. There was no alien trying to kill everybody, or a huge villain that seems impossible to kill chasing victims, but real-life people acting on their sadistic pleasures. Not that there's anything wrong with these fictional horrors, but a relatively new genre of horror was being formed, which personally made me scared in my day-to-day life more than anything ever made up. But did you know that The Strangers was actually inspired by real-life events? The Strangers was inspired by 3 separate events. The first event is the infamous Charles Manson killing of Sharon Tate in 1969 August 9th. Shannon Tate was a promising upcoming actress, and she was at a director's house named Roman Polanski's. Sharon Tate was 8.5 months pregnant, and her and 4 others were brutally stabbed to death. The Charles Manson murderers then wrote the graphic information saying "pig" on the front of the door in Sharon Tate's own blood. This disturbing home invasion, as well as the intense levels of cruelty, would later take on a direct influence in many of the scenes we can see in the Strangers movies.
Why are you doing this?
Why not?
We are continuing our investigation into the Keddie murders in rural Plumas County. It happened 40 years ago this month.
The second influence is the Keddie Cabin murders of 1981. In 1979, Glenn Susan Sharp, along with 5 of her children, left her home in Connecticut after separating from her abusive husband. She decided to relocate to Northern California, where her brother Don was residing at the time. Upon arriving in California, she began renting a small trailer formerly occupied by the brother at the Claremont Trailer Village in Quincy. The following fall, she moved to house number 28 in the rural Sierra Nevada resort in the town of Keddie. The house was much larger than the trailer, and for the first time in a long time she felt happy and safe. There she resided with her 15-year-old son, John, 14-year-old stepdaughter Sheila, 12-year-old daughter Tina, and her 2 younger sons, Rick and Greg. Around 7 AM in the morning of April 12th, Sheila returned home from her friend's house and discovered the dead bodies of Sue, John, and Dina in the house's living room. All 3 of them had been bound with medical tape and electrical cords. Tina was absent from the home, while there were 3 younger children, Rick, Greg, and Justin, that were unarmed and in the adjacent bedroom. Initial reports stated that the 3 young boys had slept through the incident, though this was later contradicted. Upon discovery of the scene, Sheila rushed back to her friend's house, where her friend's father retrieved the 3 sons from the bedroom window. He later admitted to having briefly entered the home through the back door to see if anyone was still alive, potentially contaminating evidence in the process. The murders of Sue, John, and Dana were notably vicious. 2 blooded knives and 1 hammer were found at the scene, and one of the knives had been bent at roughly 30 degrees from all of the damage it had been done on the victims. Blood spatter evidence from inside the house indicated that the murders of Sue, John, and Dana had all taken place in the living room. What really made these murders stand out was that the murders were suspected to have been done by 2 complete strangers. The only known suspects are shown here, which are 2 people that happened to have been walking around the area at the time. When Brian Bertino, the director of The Strangers, was asked about his strongest influence towards the movies, these murders were his answer.
Hi.
Hello.
Is Tamara here?
No, you got the wrong house.
You sure?
The final inspiration Brian Bertino had mentioned
Yeah.
for The Strangers movies was an incident that he experienced as a child. When Brian was little, one night he heard strangers knocking at the door at his family's house. The strangers realised that this house had people in, and went on further to knock at different people's houses. A few days later, the director found out that the intruders were checking to see which houses were empty. If they had no response when knocking at the doors, they would break into the house and ransack it. Now I don't know about you, but that's definitely enough to make me hate strangers from the get-go.